Hello. So in this video, I will talk a little bit about what I've come to understand so far, compared to what I thought I knew about cosmic mechanics and Ken L. Wheeler's work, and about how one of these right here works. So before you criticize Ken L. Wheeler's work, and you know, I know he has his shortcomings. A lot of the criticisms is mostly to do with his attitude towards the accepted model of physics, and a lot of the people who have mostly been sold on the accepted view, who are able to at least consider Ken's work. A lot of them are probably don't find it helpful. They don't find his negativity, towards them helpful. This is their response. But I think I can probably afford to give Ken a bit of slack on that. I don't care. If he's right, he's right, and the significance of that is to me is much more significant than you know. I mean, who cares, right? So I've made quite a lot of notes. Here. I've got 82 pages notes on his work. I'm making notes, trying to understand this stuff in my own with my own interpretation. Because I'm doing the Tai Chi as well, so this gives me an opportunity to experience this kind of thing, in my own body as well, and not just looking at the environment, but also feeling it in my own body. So this is this is a good opportunity to kind of understand these things, right? And the most important thing that I've found so far, the thing that will really kind of open the door to all of Ken's work, really, and all of this new view of electrical engineering. It's this understanding of a non-Euclidean space, or you could think of it as an extra dimension. Not like Ren and Stimpy looking for their socks and finding that their socks are in this other dimension of not that kind of dimension, but like we have a 3D space here, and we're looking at another dimension that is trans-Euclidean, so non-Cartesian, where everything is basically falling into. So in order to understand this model of electrical engineering here, you really have to be open to the idea that gravity itself is an acceleration, and that falling is falling into another space. So really, every point in space around you is like a black hole. Is like a black hole in some way. Of course, a black hole, when it gets beyond a certain, because it's become beyond a certain mass, so therefore it can't support. It can no longer. The acceleration then overwhelms the magnitude part, and then it can therefore no longer sustain itself. I hope I don't sound like I'm just regurgitating what Ken is saying too much. I do have at least a conceptual understanding of this, so I'm just trying to elicit this as best I can. And like, it's very difficult to. The most important thing here, of course, in talking about the counter space is the psi function. The psi function. I've got some equations written down here we can have a look at. So these equations here are actually to do with the charge density at a given radius of a sphere, which is something that the very early tinkerers of electricity were working with, and this was very significant to them. This understanding right here, they wouldn't have been able to come up with really any practical use of electrical. They wouldn't have any practical use of electricity without this understanding here. And this is actually kind of like a Euclidean understanding. So this is, of course, 3D space, obviously, right? Because this is measuring the radius of this sphere here. So, of course, they did not have any understanding of counter space. They did not. They didn't see it, clearly like today, like people like Ken and Eric Dollard. They see this very clearly, and they make the point by saying it straightforward, that you can't understand electrical engineering. You will not understand electricity, what it is, without understanding counter space. And so this was this was the best they could do back then. This was kind of like, their substitute, for lack of a better way to describe it, for counter space, was this kind of understanding here, to do with the electric flux, displacement flux, which is represented by psi. You see this psi symbol here. Right, so the important thing about this psi function here, let me read a page from Dynamics of Mechatronic Systems, Modeling, Simulation, Control, etc., which is a very good book on the subject, which, well, actually it's not specifically, but it just includes this because you need this for the mechatronics. So, and what's important is when these books describe the electric flux, they always note this, that electric flux is symbolized by phi. The scalar quantity of electric flux is symbolized by phi, and its density with the vector here. The vector is symbolized by d, with an arrow on the top to indicate that there's a vector here. And this d here, it cannot be directly measured. It cannot be directly measured, or it cannot even be measured at all, directly, whatever, indirectly. You can only calculate the charge density, which is the psi component here. So that's very important to understand. And there is a reason why the stuff in nature naturally assumes these kind of shapes. And when Ken holds the magnets, right? When he holds the magnet under the ferrocell, he makes it very clear that the lines going out, the lines that you can see of light, that is the magnetism. The space in between is the dielectricity, is the acceleration. So I came up with an interesting thought, which I think is probably valid. One of the reasons why these creatures here build homes in this shape is because this shape allows them to be sucked in here. It causes an acceleration. It causes an acceleration through here. That's why it's very clear when you touch the slug. I'm sorry, the snail. It's very easy for them to retract in here because they can cause an acceleration very easily. Same the way that you feel the acceleration pulling you down here. The same acceleration that is pulling through a magnet here. That is pulling into a magnet. So that's interesting. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I could be. Could be right. It's an interesting thought that there is some relevance to this shape here in causing some sort of acceleration in there. Now, as I say, I got kind of a conceptual understanding of this, and I mean, the reason I do this stuff and the reason I make these notes, the reason I'm interested in this at all is because field propulsion, right? As soon as we master that field propulsion, as soon as anyone has a practical understanding that can apply that, well, the world will be very different, very quickly. And for me, looking at that, and it's like this is like a human right, really. I mean, this is really a human right, just as a citizen of this galaxy, of this universe. It's our right to field propulsion. It's our right to space travel. So there's no reason why this should be kept from us. This is our right. But I'll have to cover the top part here because I think I know how this works, and I've kind of drawn a little diagram up here of how this actually works. This field propulsion using a magnet and adjusting what is called now is called the block wall, but it's not, as Ken explains. It's actually due to pressure mediation of the fields. But you can actually change the position of that block wall, which is I'm showing that by this dotted line here. You can change that position of the block wall, and when you do that, using a small current perpendicular to the dielectric inertial plane, which is Ken's way of saying the block wall. A much better explanation, actually. The dielectric inertial plane, which I've represented by the dotted line, which would normally be in the center across the midsection of this figure here. But by using a small coil of wire, you can actually pull that down, and it will, and of course, a small current through the wire as well. It will change the position, and it will cause an effect. It will cause an effect whereby the amount of the magnetism will be focused on this part here. So the reason that a magnet doesn't repel anything else besides other magnets, it will only attract other materials. It will actually repel not ferromagnetic, diamagnetic materials, which is pretty much any material, any non-ferrous material is diamagnetic. So, like if you get a rat and you suspend him, if you put a rat in that's what was called experiment. Put a rat in like a transparent cup and hung it from a wall and had this monster magnet and was actually pushing the rat away with the field of the magnet and not actually making contact, but it was pushing the rat away by a very small degree, but it was very interesting. So, but that's a very, very small amount. But you see, I mean, people are saying, well, there's no example of, we can see how birds fly, we can see how, stuff flies, using an aerofoil, so we have a conceptual understanding of that. Therefore, we can build aeroplanes and we can, make stuff fly in the air with that way. But how there's no model for anti-gravity or field propulsion. We look around and it's like, how do we model that? Well, there's a few examples. One example is actually the way spiders, as Ken mentions, this way the way spiders do this, what do they call it, ballooning, where on a very dry day they can actually put spindle some web out into the air, and that will actually pull them up, even with no breeze at all. So that's actually purely due to static electricity. But the reason why this magnet here doesn't float in the air, can't repel anything else, is because not just because the field is not strong enough. Yes, it's quite. It's not that strong. If it was strong enough, for example, if you had a several Tesla, like a 5-6 Tesla electromagnet, you could actually float, and you pointed it up 90 degrees to the acceleration of gravity. This would actually float, or you could put little cockroaches, or I don't know, maybe you could put your hand. I wouldn't suggest it, but if you put your hand on there, you would feel that you would not be able to push your hand. You would feel it would resist your falling of your force of your hand in midair. So, but there is a way to change the field here, because remember, a magnet has no poles. There are two fundamental forces in a magnet, but they are not poles. They are the force in motion and the inertia and acceleration. Those are the two components, not this north and south business that people try and have you. There is a slight difference actually between the north and the south pole. If you look at it, it will actually look like an egg. So there is a geometric difference, but that's not a fundamental difference between the north and the south. That's due to the pressure mediation, and that's actually causing a polarization of time as well, of the magnitude. But the two fundamental components here in a magnet are the dielectricity and the magnetism. The magnetism is force in motion. It is centrifugal. So you can think of that as an expansion, for lack of a better way. It's to dumb it down completely. You can think of that as an expansion. Really, you need a much more intrinsic understanding than that. But if you want, you can just say it's an expansion. And then you have the dielectric component, or the inertia, the centripetal coming towards the center, which is, you can think of that as a contraction. But if you just think of that as a contraction, well, you don't have the conceptual understanding of why it's contracting. Like, you can feel the gravity pulling you down, so you have a kind of an understanding of that, but pulling you down into what? Going where? So you have to understand counter space. Otherwise, it doesn't complete that circle, right? It doesn't complete that whole cycle. Once you understand, try to look at the camera here. Once you understand a counter space, you then understand the whole cycle. You will then gradually you will instinctively know how to build how these circuits work and how to make them work. If you have a fully understanding of that whole cycle of that counter space, which is something, as I say, I'm doing Tai Chi as well. I'm standing in these postures and doing this breathing using the mind intent. And so you also have to have a good understanding of counter space in Tai Chi, which is not kind of said like that, but it is alluded to, it is elicited in some way in the Tai Chi classics and in the practice of Tai Chi. This kind of idea is alluded to in some way, and you do need to understand that full cycle in order to have a complete Tai Chi. There's so many people that can't really use it for much. They can't really use the Tai Chi for much. Maybe it just improves their health a little bit, but using it for really improving their movement, really making a difference in a really significant difference in their movement that could be developed beyond a certain threshold, to be used, very efficiently. They do not know how to do that because they don't understand that whole cycle. So understand counter space, get an understanding of that, then you know how this works. Now, when you pull this, I've got to hide that because that's actually how it works. I think that's how Ken L. Wheeler's device actually works. Now, when you pull that field, the pressure mediation, the pressure zone, the dielectrical inertial plane, when you pull that down a little bit using an external current, using an external magnetic field, this is all via the right-hand rule. So you have to understand the right-hand rule a little bit. I've got it, one part of it written down here. This is the part of the right-hand rule, acceleration and force. Now, when you apply that, you actually do this. Okay, so normally the magnetic field is more of an egg shape, but when you do this, you are doing this to the magnetic field. So you have more magnetism down there, okay, and you have more inertia going up as well. So when you do this, and when you play around with it like this, the effect will not be very much because, of course, you're only using a small current, and a small magnet like this can only do so much. But it will resist the pull of gravity, the acceleration, as you move it towards that point of acceleration, as you move it towards the gravity. So that is my understanding so far, and it's I think I understand this stuff a little better than I used to. I was like, what? Really a little bit confused by it. I knew it was very I knew this was important, but I couldn't really see how. But I kept looking into it, and I kept writing notes here, and I still will until I gain a much better understanding of this to really apply it. Because, as I say, the reason I'm interested in this, because this is like a human right, really. If you unless you're living under a rock, I mean, if you really look into this, you will also feel this is like a human right. They shouldn't. No one should keep this from people, especially if they have benevolent intentions with it. They want to use this in an abundant way to cooperate and to help other people. This is really a human right that we need. We need this to solve the transportation issues, the energy issues. So, I'm just like, oh my God, how long do I have to wait? So, I hope I don't have to wait too much longer, because it is really a really long drag just to have to sit here and wait and just hope that someone else out there, which they are, but it's probably going to take time. So anyway, thank you for watching this video, and please leave some comments and help me with this research. And yeah, let's get this field propulsion up and running.